All right, this is Fab Five, the top five predictions I'll have every single week for each UFC fight card. Usually will be a part of the Monday episode of the matchup, but completely forgot to add it on to today's episode. So a little 5 to 10 minute segment on its own video right now for this week. But every week this will be on my Monday episode of the matchup. But this is the top five predictions I have for UFC Fight Night. Steve Garcia versus David Onama. Not the most exciting card, but you're going to get something out of it looking for these five things to happen. We're going to start off with Phil Rowe knocking out Seok Ko. I do believe stylistically it's an advantageous matchup for Phil Rowe. I think actually in a smaller cage, I like the taller guy a lot, especially if I already liked him if it was a normal cage, if it was a normal event in front of a crowd. Phil Rowe in the apex here in the smaller cage is going to be the longer fighter. He's going to have the reach advantage. I like that fight he had against Ons Lusal, though he dealt with some adversity. Phil Rowe and his recovery and his determination in that fight gave me something to look forward to moving forward. And this matchup, in my opinion, is kind of a spit in the face for him. I feel like he deserved a better fight. I think Seok Ko is running off of this big fight off of Oban Elliott, where Oban Elliott is wildly overrated at the time. And now Seok Ko is a substantial favorite in this fight. I don't understand how he's that big of a favorite over Phil Rowe. I think Phil Rowe should be the favorite in this fight. I think Phil Rowe is the better fighter. I think Phil Rowe might be the better grappler. I don't think Seok Ko is going to be able to take him down. I don't think Seok Ko is going to be able to land on him proactively. I think he's going to struggle with the distance. I don't think Phil Rowe's as hittable as Oban Elliott is. He's not as lackluster in the striking. I think Phil Rowe is going to give Seok Ko trouble. I think he's going to hurt him. And I think he knocks out Seok Ko in this fight. Ko's been knocked out twice already in his career against much more subpar competition, improving throughout his career so far, and that Oban Elliott performance did look good, but I do think Phil Rowe has the tools to be able to keep the distance, find his range a lot quicker, and land big early on Ko as Ko tries to figure out his range and won't necessarily be able to establish it too much. My worry with Phil Rowe in this fight, though, is him backing up very often, and Seok Ko does like moving forward. In this small cage, if Phil Rowe doesn't use some sort of forward pressure like he did in round 3 against Ons Lusal, it could cost him. It could get him caught. I think he's going to fix it up a little bit and not start off slow, not start off on the back foot this time. And even if he does, I still think he finds his range. Give me Phil Rowe by knockout against Seok Ko. Moving on to Dante Johnson versus Cedric Dumas. Dante Johnson just got a knockout win in the Contender Series. He's going to get another knockout win here against Cedric Dumas. I think Dumas is not UFC caliber. I'm still surprised he's in the UFC, especially, with all the we'll just call it extracurriculars for now with Cedric Dumas of what's been going on. But I think Dante Johnson knocks him out. I think Johnson's a little bit interesting to be fighting at 185. I feel like he could definitely be fighting a little bit lower in weight classes, cutting a little bit, but the guy's a tank, and the guy hits like a truck. And Cedric Dumas is ridiculously hittable. He's going to be trying to grapple in this fight as he does against several lower-level competition. And not even lower level. I mean, Dumas is kind of at that level. But Dumas can get some people down like Abu Azaitar and Dennis Tilulin, guys who cannot grapple to save their lives. And he can lay on them. And he can pray while laying on them. But right now, a lot of referees aren't necessarily letting that happen. In the Apex, though, it happens a lot more often than it does outside of the Apex. So maybe Dumas can get some grappling going. I think it's going to be pretty difficult for Dumas to be shooting on Dante Johnson with how freaking... he's built like Deron Wynn, but a lot thicker, a lot more explosive, and a lot more muscular. I just think Dante Johnson's going to make it way too difficult for Dumas to even shoot a takedown. I think Dumas hasn't improved at all on the feet, and Johnson's going to be able to knock him out big time in the first round, in my opinion. I think Dante Johnson's going to walk through Cedric Dumas in this fight. And hopefully, finally, Cedric Dumas gets cut from the UFC. Not trying to prey on anybody's downfall, but at the same time, there are just certain things that need to happen. Extracurriculars. Dumas himself in the UFC has been either completely boring or been finished. At what point are we just going to make the move here as the UFC? Moving on to Alan Nascimento. He defeats Cody Durden. I think Cody Durden's coming in on short notice in this fight, if I recall correctly. I think Nascimento was supposed to fight Rafael Estevam. Estevam pulls out. Nascimento's better than Cody Durden everywhere. He's the better grappler. He is the better striker. He is the bigger fighter. I think he can fight across these 3 rounds well against Cody Durden, and I think he could deal a lot more damage to Durden. I think Durden's a pretty decent fighter, and Durden's pretty game. I mean, he accepts every single fight, takes a lot of short notice fights. I just don't see how he beats Alan Nascimento here. He gets control. I'd be surprised if he gets a good amount of control over Nascimento in this fight. I think Nascimento's looked good overall throughout his UFC career at flyweight. I'm pretty sure it's a catchweight if I'm not wrong. Cannot remember exactly where the weight is lying for this catch weight. It might have been like 130 or something like that. But I think Nascimento is going to be able to handedly beat Durden. I'm not going to say he finishes him because I'm not too confident in Nascimento pushing a pace early. Nascimento kind of takes his time at times, but he lands a big shot here and there, and he will take some control in these fights as well. I'm not going to say he's going to finish Durden. I do think he handedly defeats him. So I'm going to go Aldo Nascimento beats Cody Durden in that fight. On to the final two. We're going to do the co-main and main event. For the most part, we're going to have co-main and main event in all these Fab Five videos. It just depends on how bad the card is, and this is a pretty bad card, and I still think the co-main event is worth talking about. Ante Delija defeats Waldo Cortez Acosta. Waldo Cortez Acosta's fight against Sergey Pavlovich didn't look the greatest, although it is Sergey Pavlovich. It's very, very lackluster, very subpar. And Delija isn't Sergey Pavlovich by any means. Doesn't have the threat, but he does have a good amount of threat on the knockout. I do think he can kind of win some clinch moments against Waldo. In a smaller cage, I prefer the guy with the bigger knockout power that I kind of trust in momentum. I like Ante Delija against Waldo. Waldo can get a little bit more complacent at times. Delija doesn't necessarily do that. And in a smaller cage with heavyweights and a co-main event in a pretty big spot for a heavyweight, considering the garbage we just had last week, I do think that a good heavyweight spot in the co-main event for Delija to come in, especially after his boy Tom Aspinall put on a stinker, to make a good moment out of the heavyweight division and put his name in the bucket list. It's time. The name in the bucket, rather, is definitely time for Delija to come in, and I think Waldo's a pretty good opponent for him to do it against. Now, Waldo is pretty durable. If Waldo can survive this storm of Delija early on, how does it look as the fight goes on? Maybe Waldo can start separating round 2, round 3. But I think Delija does fine first 2 rounds. Round 3 could be a little bit shaky. But I think Delija walks out of this. He either finishes Waldo and it's going to be an insane knockout because you don't really see Waldo getting finished. Or you're going to see Ante Delija come in with a really good 3-round win in a co-main event spot after a heavyweight disaster show that we just saw. Then maybe you do Delija versus Walter Walker, #1 contender fight. And I know it sounds bad, or maybe you do Delija versus Curtis Blades or something like that. I don't know. I'm very keen on Walter Walker getting up there. I'm very keen on Delija getting up there if he beats Waldo. And you have Curtis Blades just coming off a big win. So you do need to start mixing these things up in the heavyweight division. Delija starts mixing it up by beating Waldo Cortez Acosta. And lastly, into the main event, we have Steve Garcia. I think he knocks out David Onama. I think David Onama makes too many mistakes in the octagon. We see it time and time again. The Nate Landwehr fight, the biggest indication of it. Steve Garcia, I think, has been improving a lot more proactively. I think he's a better grappler than David Onama is. Onama has some pretty good scrambles, though. I don't think much of this fight will land in the grappling. But I wouldn't be surprised if either of these guys shoot a takedown. I really wouldn't. We saw, I think, Onama grapple a bit against Giga Chikadze. I think Steve Garcia was grappling a bit in some of his recent fights. I believe Garcia is going to be able to keep the range at Onama. I think Onama might struggle at the range against Steve Garcia. And Garcia will land big early. I think Onama, a lot of the times, leaves himself open very early, and Garcia can land big. But Onama also likes to land big early. I'd be shocked if this fight ever lasts 5 rounds. Be shocked if it goes past 3. But these guys have been fighting a little bit more timid, a little bit more calculated, going away from what got them to the position they're in right now to fight for a main event. So I feel like the more proactive guy in this fight moving forward will be Steve Garcia. I feel like David Onama might meet him in the middle at times. Nonetheless, if David Onama is not moving forward and pushing Steve Garcia back, I feel like it's going to be a very tough fight for Onama throughout a 5-rounder, especially if he wants to finish the fight off the back foot, or trying to meet Steve Garcia in the middle, playing at his range, letting Steve Garcia control the octagon, control the position in a small cage. I don't think it's a good idea for David Onama, and I think it's exactly what's going to happen in this fight. And I see David Onama getting knocked out by Steve Garcia. I could see a submission. I'd be shocked, though. I feel like Garcia hurts him and then gets him out of there with the knockout, finishes it with a couple ground and pound. And that's going to be the end of it. Steve Garcia finishes David Onama by knockout. Just to repeat them all for the Fab Five of UFC Fight Night, Garcia versus Onama. Phil Rowe knocks out Seokhyun Ko. Dante Johnson knocks out Cedricus Dumas. Alan Nascimento defeats Cody Durden. Ante Delija defeats Waldo Cortez Acosta. And Steve Garcia knocks out David Onama to end the night. Appreciate you guys for watching. I'll see you guys for tomorrow's episode of The Matchup. Peace out.